The Ford Performance Parts 6-piston 15-inch brake upgrade kit brings GT500 braking performance to 2005 to 2014 Mustangs. It's a complete kit that upgrades both the front and rear brakes on S197 Mustangs to 15-inch front rotors with 6-piston Brembo calipers and 13.8-inch rear rotors. The rear brake setup's 13.8-inch diameter rotors are as large as the standard Mustang GT's front rotors. The result is a balanced, factory-proven brake package for S197 Mustangs. The front brake setup is a massive 2-inch diameter increase over the factory standard brakes and a full 1-inch diameter increase over the optional 4-piston Brembo brake package. The kit includes front brake hoses and all necessary hardware for a complete installation. The 6-piston front calipers feature a gloss black finish and are preloaded with brake pads. The 15-inch Brembo front rotors feature extensive internal venting to aid in heat rejection. The 13.8-inch rear rotors are also nicely vented, and the package includes new rear calipers, brackets, and pads. The GT500 brake kit requires that the rear axles are removed to install the rear caliper brackets. While we had the differential cover off, we replaced it with Ford Performance Parts finned aluminum axle cover. It features deep cooling fins that keep rear axle temperatures in check under heavy use. To aid in brake cooling, we installed Kenny Brown's brake duct kit. It includes spindle adapters, 3-inch high-temp silicone hose, and all hardware. We started the installation process by removing the wheels. To gain access to the brake hose mounting bracket, we removed the plastic splash shield. Next, we used a 13mm line wrench to disconnect the hydraulic hardline. To prevent excess brake fluid loss, we capped off the hardline. Then we unbolted the factory Brembo brake caliper and removed the rotor. We removed the factory splash shield to make way for the Kenny Brown brake duct adapters. The Ford Performance Parts setup's 15-inch front rotors and 6-piston calipers dwarf the already large factory Brembo brake package. We slid the 15-inch rotors on the hubs and bolted up the 6-piston brake calipers. Next, we torqued the hoses to the calipers and connected them to the hard lines. With the front complete, we moved to the rear. First, we disconnected the parking brake cables. Then, we unbolted the calipers from the axle brackets. We used a zip tie to securely hang the calipers out of the way. We removed the brake rotors and the rear splash shields. We removed the ABS sensor from the caliper bracket. With a pan waiting to catch the fluid, we removed the differential cover bolts and carefully pried the cover from the axle housing. Next, we rotated the differential to expose the cross-pin lock bolt and used a box end wrench to remove it. We used a brass drift to carefully nudge the crosspin from the differential. If you go too far, you can trap the crosspin behind the differential and make it very difficult to remove. We used a magnet to fish out the C-clips from the differential. Next, we slid the axle shafts out from the housing. All that work was so we could remove the caliper brackets. We removed the anti-moan bracket. It wasn't reused with the GT500 rear setup. The GT500 caliper bracket moves the caliper out further to accommodate the larger 13.8 rear rotor. It attaches to the axle housing just like the standard bracket with the factory bolts. Being careful not to damage the axle seals, we reinstalled the axle shafts. We used Permatex gear oil gasket maker to seal the finned aluminum cover to the axle housing. After we installed the cover finger tight, we waited an hour before torquing the cover into place. While we waited 24 hours for the sealant to cure, we continued installation by bolting up the ABS sensor. We temporarily reinstalled the rear brake calipers and disconnected the rear brake hoses. We used pliers to remove the old copper crush washers from the flow bolt. We plugged the brake hose fittings with rubber plugs to minimize brake fluid loss. Just like the front, the rear rotor size difference is striking compared to the factory installed rotors. The calipers are the same sliding single piston design as the originals. We slid the new 13.8-inch rotors over the ends of the axle shafts, bolted up the calipers, and used the supplied copper crush washers to seal the brake hose to the caliper. We used a pressure bleeder to flush the brake fluid and bleed the calipers. We filled the pressure bleeder with two 500 milliliter bottles of fresh brake fluid. Using two bleeder bottles, we bled the front calipers until fresh fluid flowed into the bottles. Bleeding the rear calipers is a little more complex. Ford recommends removing the outer rear pad and replacing it with a shop towel. Then we slowly pumped the brake pedal until the pistons were fully extended from the rear calipers. Then we used a brake caliper piston tool to screw the pistons back into the calipers while we bled them. You can see the fluid go into the bottle as we compressed the piston. After the differential cover sealant cured for 24 hours, we filled the differential with 85W140 gear oil until the fluid was 5 millimeters below the fill hole on the front of the differential. We didn't have a Boss 302 lower grill, so we used a 2.5-inch hole saw to cut a hole in the factory lower grill opening. We used some scrap 2.5-inch exhaust tubing and 1/4-inch foam rubber strip to make an adapter to fit the 3-inch silicone hose included with the Kenny Brown brake cooling kit. Here's how we routed the brake duct hose. We started at the spindle, anchored it to the sway bar, and ran it to the grill. This was a pleasant surprise. We found the factory 19-inch Brembo brake package wheels fit over the GT500 calipers. This means we don't have to buy new wheels to fit the larger 6-piston calipers, saving a lot of money. This 2012 Mustang GT now has stopping capability that far exceeds its factory setup. Even though there's significantly more stopping power available, feedback and response is just like the factory brakes. All this and they fit behind the factory 19-inch wheels. We're ready to hit the track with confidence with this balanced brake kit from Ford Performance Parts.